Amen to
We were
that.
in the White Mountains last weekend, and it was just so beautiful. It would be like 50s at night, in northern New Hampshire, and then like high 70s or low 80s during the day. And then we came back home Sunday night, and I was like, oh, it's so humid and gross.
Yeah, it's 9 a.m. here in Vegas, and we're at 100 degrees. So, yeah, a little envious.
And you're outside. That is brave.
Yeah, because if you could hear what's going on inside my house right now with my 3 children, it is like, I mean, you would think World War III is going on in there. So I just stay out here.
I thought you were going to say, yes, but it's a dry heat.
No. It's actually pretty humid here today. It's weird. Not by any means humid like East Coast or Houston. We are not by any body of water. So it's very, very dry, I'm sure. But you can feel like the thickness in the air that's not normal. So.
All right. Well, I am going to record this unless somebody has an objection. It will be posted where public can access it. Is everybody okay with that? Please show me with an uplifted finger or thumb, whichever. Just let's make it a thumb. Yeah, let's no fingers. No fingers. All right. In the last session, Heidi and the New Hampshire folks were good enough to share some of their work that they've been doing on delineating training and skills and those kind of things, which I thought were very interesting. And a subject came up, and it's something that we need to address within the APG community. We actually have a better chance. These are my opinions, by the way, just opinions. But they're not all, some of them are anchored pretty solidly in research also. We have a chance to address harm reduction and medication assisted treatment in ways that other programs do not have an opportunity to do that. And in my opinion, and we have a chance to use those things in, I think, ultimately what they were designed to do, etc. So I thought we might spend some time, since we have the New Hampshire folks here, and they brought, y'all used it, you mentioned it or you mentioned it, Heidi, in the last session. I thought we would take some time and discuss that some, because it is a reality and a necessity that we consider how does an APG move around these kinds of things. In addition to that, I thought we would also work some with intensive outpatient models. You guys, we were talking about staffing, and it came up, well, do we put a certified person or a licensed person in a group with peer recovery people, or facilitators, to do an IOP or a group therapy and those kind of things. So I thought we might dig a little deeper into that too. Is that okay with everyone? Anybody have an objection? If you do, that's okay. I'll just cry and go away and raise goats. All right. In that case, let me ask, let's see. Y'all want to start with the MAT thing or the IOP? We have 3-letter anachronisms or whatever they're called. MAT or IOP? Anybody got a?
I would like, I'm really interested in the harm reduction MAT, because I just went through a 5-day harm reduction class. It was geared more towards adults, and it was really hard for me to wrap my head around harm reduction and MAT for adolescents, because we work very closely with the Recovery High School, and abstinence is a requirement. It's not an option. Mm-hmm. So I'm very curious how to work that in.
That's great. Let me ask you something, and this is why I said, Heidi, if y'all don't mind, if you guys could share kind of the model that the nuts and bolts of the daily process of the model y'all are working with right now, it might be helpful to us, because I know you're including that in your design specs quite a bit. Could one of y'all share with us kind of the model itself, how the operational elements of the model and where the MAT and harm reduction fits into it? How it fits into it is really what we're asking for. I'm asking for.
Yeah, so I can share if you want to enable screen sharing, I can share just
Sure.
a little bit about our model. I'm just pulling up a slide here. I'm not sure that I can speak specifically to medication assisted treatment. You know, I wouldn't feel super qualified talking specifically to that, but I can walk you through you know, the model that we're using here in New Hampshire. And so let me just see if I can share. So
All
John,
right,
if you want to go
you just
to,
got made co-host, so you
okay,
should be able to
okay,
share.
super. Thank you. So here in New Hampshire, we had a grant a few years ago where we had the benefit of really doing some foundational work to assess what how big the problem is here in New Hampshire for youth specifically. We are the live free or die state. That is our state motto, which Sean talked about last week. And there's literally a liquor store at like every major exit off of our highway. So as you can imagine, you know, we've got some substance abuse issues here in the state. You know, a few years ago when we had a statewide planning grant, then we were able to really inventory the landscape and look at you know, the prevalence and what we have in place. And we don't really have a lot of intensive outpatient services or residential services here in the state. And so a lot of families were sending their kids out of state if they needed inpatient treatment. And so what we really tried to do with this current grant is look at developing a continuum of supports. And so, and really embed peer support throughout the entire model. So as we facilitated focus groups, what we found is that families reported time and time again that some of the most beneficial and effective supports actually came from peer, youth, and family support, right? And so we really wanted to make sure that recovery coaching and peer support was embedded across the model. So currently we have various ways that youth can come into the project. And what we're doing is, you know, we're using CANS as the substance use disorder assessment. So that's the child adolescent needs and strengths assessment. And then based on that assessment, the youth would be referred to a level of care. And so medication assisted treatment is one option along this continuum. And alternative peer groups are a part of this continuum as well. And so the evidence-based treatment that we have selected that we're using as the primary treatment modality in the Creating Connections project is called the 7 Challenges. And 7 Challenges really grounds in the understanding that most adolescents don't willingly come to treatment of their own fruition, right?
Yeah.
That they're often, you know, reluctant participants in the recovery process, and really utilizes motivational interviewing in the stages of change to really help youth understand both the benefits, right? Because we all engage in behavior for a purpose, right? We're getting something out of it or we wouldn't be engaging in it. And so we want them to understand what they're getting out of the substance use, as well as, you know, what some of those consequences of using substances might be. And medication assisted treatment is, again, one option along that continuum. And so what we're doing is the youth work individually with the counselors, but then they also are participating in a 7 challenges group. And what we had happening before the pandemic hit was we had some youth peer support specialists that would participate in that group who had received an overview of the 7 challenges. But then the groups stopped once the pandemic came about, and as we transitioned to virtual, we had less youth engagement in those virtual groups. And so the youth peer support specialists were actually asked to discontinue participation in those groups because there were so few youth that it felt like professionals in the group were kind of overpowering or outnumbering the number of youth. So that's an unfortunate side effect of what happened as we transitioned to telehealth services. But we, as I said during the introduction, we are trying to stand up alternative peer groups. And so I shared last week our practice profile that identifies the critical skills and what that would look like. So I don't know if folks have specific questions, but this is essentially our model, here, and peer support and alternative peer groups are along the continuum of services.
Okay. I actually do have some things. This is exactly, and I want to thank you. And by the way, I didn't mean to, what's the word I'm looking for? Surprise you with this.
Oh no, it's totally fine. It's totally fine. So
you had that available was wonderful. It's a lot more than I expected. I just was looking for a conversation and some ideas and some things. But if you would, so take us through right now where does a call for help usually come from in the model?
So it might come from a parent, it might come from a court involvement, or, a clinician might make a referral. So there are various referring sources, so
Okay.
we've done a lot of outreach to schools, and we do have substance abuse program counselors in many of our schools. Not all of our schools in New Hampshire have SAPs.
Okay.
But so sometimes the schools will make those referrals because there's been a discipline issue, or a kid has been, found on campus, with substances or selling substances or something.
Got it. And at that point, that is when in the flow chart that we were just looking at, that's when the basically the assessment and
right. Yeah.
And you use CANS to do that. All right. Am I right so far?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Who does the assessment?
So those are clinicians. So we use a couple of entry points. So the doorways, in New Hampshire is, one of the entry points. And we had a couple of different pilot sites that were piloting the Creating Connections model. And unfortunately, we've had one of those pilot sites have to pull out of the project because they've had some staffing issues. So right now we're down to one pilot site, but have just gotten approval to expand to a couple of alternative sites, but that hasn't started yet.
All right. When they have done the CANS, and then the CANS will send them in the other directions from there. The people doing the assessments, administering the CANS, are they familiar with the model that you are hoping to include the young people and their family in?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. So all of the intake coordinators, and folks that are doing those assessments get at least an overview of the 7 challenges model.
Okay. The CANS, will it indicate when medication is indicated?
Yeah, so what they do is, and actually I could probably pull up that flow chart again, but oh no, it looks like I closed it. Let me see, I can pull it back up here. If I find the right document. So essentially, you know, when they're doing those assessments, they're using screening and brief intervention. Where's the share here? There we go. And you know, and so so it might be that a youth has, you know, just you know, experimented one time and happened to get caught that one time, right? Or it might be that they've been using for a while, and so you know, so as they are identifying and assessing for substance use disorder. They're going to assess a level of care that's appropriate and then make a referral, you know. So for some youth, it might be just that they're using, you know, screening and brief intervention and referral to, you know, to some really less intensive outpatient counseling, right? But someone else who is further along in their substance use disorder, you know, might really necessitate medication-assisted treatment.
What are the criteria that lead to medication-assisted treatment?
So I don't have that right in front of me. You know, I certainly could reach out to one of our clinicians at one of our pilot sites and ask them if they could share that.
Yeah, if you could, that would be greatly appreciated.
So what they're using the ASM criteria. I'm just looking to see if I can quickly find it, but I can't. No. Yeah. I could certainly reach out and ask them to share that.
That would be wonderful. Yeah, because most of the times the folks that I talk with and I'm around, and as the harm reduction and the medically assisted treatment things, you know, are getting talked about, the concern centers around when it's used and how it's used and what are the goals and all of those kind of things. And it's a little bit difficult to get that tied down. So it would be really helpful if you would send the criteria on, and that way we could assess how and when to use that on you know, some of the other programs that we're interested in that side of things, because it's a reality out there and we need to work with it and deal with it.
Right.
We need to work with it, deal with it responsibly. And that means gathering as much information as possible, you know, and going with that. Anybody got any questions so far, or ideas or thoughts? Yeah, that's weird. You guys are way too quiet.
I have a question.
Okay.
I mean, I'm used to the abstinence only, but I have a recovery coaching business and I have one client that's on MAT. She's an adult though, you know, so I can handle that because it's very individualized. But how do you incorporate MAT with an APG where everybody else, maybe there's one or two kids doing MAT because they really need it? How do you deal with that when everybody else is supposed to be abstinent, you know? Like the goals, I'm curious too, John, like what are the goals for them? Because it is individualized, you know, like how long they're on it. What are the goals for getting them off? Because that should be a goal, right? I don't know. With teenagers, it's different, I guess. It's a difficult conversation. So.
Yeah, I think, you know, we've been really intentional around all of our language, and we haven't started yet. So, you know, it might be, you know, a very messy can of worms that we're that we're getting into. You know, we'll have to wait and see. But we've been really intentional to avoid, you know, language around sobriety, for example, which you know, we've heard from folks in the recovery community can feel really shaming to them if they're using medication assisted treatment, you know, that it feels really stigmatizing. And so we've intentionally tried to use the language of recovery and avoid you know, language specifically around abstinence or sobriety, you know, and so so the rules that so like Kaylin and Hannah Milne, you know, shared their like youth family orientation packets, I think, and we've gone through multiple organizations orientation packets and kind of revised a lot of the language to adopt for our model, really focusing, really trying to embed that the values of harm reduction throughout, as opposed to abstinence and you know, but the rules, you know, the rules for participation in the APG that we've outlined say that youth will refrain from, you know, bringing substances or using substances, you know, before or during, you know, any APG activities.
In historically, just, and I guess that's my role here, is be the old dude with stuff out of history. Historically, actually, there were basically 3 rules to attending the program, and one is you don't come high or holding, and 2, you know, don't have sex at the meetings and stuff, and I don't even remember what the third one was right now, but no violence or something like that, you know, that kind of thing. They were real simple, and they have remained that basically. So it's a very interesting time. The catch-22 in this is you don't want to shame anybody, but you also don't want to enable anybody.
Right. Yeah.
That's the hard part, and where all of this language has got to be developed, and we have to work with it. We have to be open about it also, and how to use it, because obviously medications can be a big help, you know, or they can be not so much a help, and doing it right and everything is why I so appreciate Heidi sharing, you know, some of these things. I saw, if y'all didn't see it, she posted the link to the criteria. I would appreciate it if everybody take a look at that before next time, so we can continue this conversation on a little bit further. Anybody got a comment or anything they want to make at this point?
I don't want to like say too much, but I think this is a really interesting conversation and one that I'm fascinated by. I also work with recovery residences, and it's fascinating to hear the exact conversation in both settings. I just find that really interesting. And I know that, Robin, like, I totally get your concern and where you're coming from, right? Around the abstinence-based models, and what Kaylin said around, you know, we work oftentimes with high schools that they have to be abstinent when they're at school. So I totally get it. I think that's an interesting complexity. And I would love to hear more dialogue about what you guys are thinking around that. I know with the residences, what we're doing is we're setting up, so we just got a contract. We're going to be setting up 12 MAT only recovery residences across the state of Texas, and evaluating them. So thank you, Kaylin. Yeah, we're pretty excited about it. But one of the, so all but one of the homes are MAT only, and we have one home that is MAT mixed. And it's sort of our guinea pig home, just to see and work through these issues of how does the model need to be different if you're going to mix folks, right? Versus keep them separate. And I think that what I'm thinking about when I think about APGs is the fact that you can't really have an MAT only APG group, right? Like I guess you could, but I don't think that would work, right? I don't know, maybe you could, but we're splitting them out in the homes, but in an APG, I don't think you would necessarily isolate those kids, right? And so I think all these questions you're having and you're thinking through are just fascinating. So thank you, Heidi, for bringing it forward. That's just it's not
Yeah.
really a question. It's just sort of a like, it's fascinating to hear the same conversations, but how the complexities are different based on setting.
Yeah.
It feels more complex here in the APG than it would in a residence. To me.
In the adult APG here, the over 25-year-old, it's no residential at all. It's all clinical, outpatient clinical, and then the meetings and social functions. It is the MAT elements, and there are some people who are are involved in MAT that are coming to the meetings. The elements are not controlled or through the clinical elements of the alternative peer group program. Okay. However, the clinical elements of the alternative peer group program are the case manager. So if the MAT starts to be not followed or abused, then that case manager will step in with whoever is administering the MAT and talk about, hey, that's not what's going on here. Also, if the MAT starts to, if it looks like to the guys who are delivering the day-to-day clinical that the MAT is not helping. I mean, if you just go by the basic, this is just opinions, all right? But, well, it's more than opinion. There's a lot of facts about what this disease is about. It's broken neurotransmitter regulation system that leads to the growth of aberrant psychology. That's what it is in a nutshell. Well, just because it's a prescription doesn't mean that it's not either breaking or keeping the neurology broken or not allowing it to heal in cases where that could occur. It's necessary in cases where it can't occur. But how do we delineate which one is which? Well, you don't. You have to go kind of by instincts. The docs go by instincts. Everybody goes by instincts. We do the best we can to measure it, but the measurement tools are not typically absolute. So in this model I'm talking about, if somebody seems to be not moving forward in recovery and the MAT seems to be a part of that, then there's a discussion that'll come up between the provider of the medication and the case manager about that. Also, the client, of course, has a lot of input into it. If I feel like I'm not getting where I want to go, I want to back off, those kind of things. And if they start abusing it or mixing it, which is only going to make things worse, of course, that gets handled. But that's a place that the alternative peer group program, if it's, and when, again, y'all have to pardon my use, everybody in their head thinks APGs are the meetings. Well, that is an alternative peer group meeting, but an APG program is something bigger than that. It's an 18-month to 4-year case management, continuity of care. It provides that element to this disease that research says 18 months to 4 years to stabilize. So if you start doing that, then it's very important as this MAT thing and the harm reduction comes on. It's very important that the people doing that case management have a full idea of what the medications are meant for, how they're supposed to be used, what's to be expected, what's the research, etc. And so being responsible in putting together these programs, I think it's important that we get ourselves really versed up on this.
So it's really interesting, John, that you frame it in that way. We have had, I don't know how many debates, as we've been designing this model, and I think I mentioned last week that we've been bringing this really robust stakeholder group together that is comprised of state organizations like DHHS and Medicaid, as well as treatment providers, peer support, recovery coaches, individuals in recovery to really co-design our model in New Hampshire. And we have had many conversations and debates about whether or not APGs should serve, you know, in the role as kind of case manager and providing information on MAT and things like that. And where we have landed, and again, we haven't piloted yet, so we'll see. We'll see when the rubber hits the road. You know, what is the right decision here? But where we have landed is that our APGs in New Hampshire, you know, we do envision are really more of this recovery community that will help youth build peer supports and, you know, engage in fun activities, and to be able to refer to additional clinical services, but that the APG itself, you know, is not really clinical.
Is the APG going to be the case manager?
No.
I want to tell you that. I want to tell you that historically that has not gone well.
Okay, so that's good to know. We so right now we have a number of organizations that are applying for some funding to start up, and we do have a couple of clinical programs that are applying, and that their model, you know, they envision being more clinical.
Yeah,
So,
and when I say the APG being the case manager, I want to make that really clear. It's not that the clinical people involved in the alternative peer group program can't be a part of the case management, but when the information coming out of the social element and the element that's working with the families also, when that information is guiding whoever is making the decisions, and it can be clinical people making the decisions if they understand the alternative peer group. If they don't, it again, historically, that's gone not very well. But if that element that is gathering the information from the family groups, gathering the information from the social groups, gathering the information from the meetings, etc., if it is a driving force in whoever it is, clinical or not, that's making the decisions, they understand the long-term element of this, it's worked out fine. If it's not, it's when historically it has not gone very well. I'm just telling you, you know.
yeah, so one of our critical components that we have identified is that there would need to be a credentialed person, not just overseeing the APG facilitators or peer support specialists, but also on site during any of the APG activities, you know, so that there is someone with that level of expertise who could step in, you know, if there were concerns.
If you get the right person, it'll work. If you get the wrong
Right.
person, it's a mess. I will just say,
Right.
that gets back to that talent-based hiring. Talent-based
Yeah.
hiring isn't a requirement just for the non-credentialed people. It's also required for credentialed ones.
Yeah.
So be really careful when you're doing that. But try and create, here's the problem. Here's what happens. The more barriers there are between the different arms that haven't been worked out on who's going to make the decision when people disagree, the more openings there are for the clients to slip through the cracks, or not slip through, wiggle through with their disease, you know, the element of it. And so if you are partnering, for example, an IOP with the APG element, going into it, you have to figure out a way, okay, let's suppose the clinician thinks this should happen and the lead facilitator thinks this should happen. They both might be credentialed, by the way. Having credential doesn't mean you can't be a facilitator.
Right, yeah, absolutely.
If both disagree, who decides? Because somebody's going to have to address the family and address the adolescent. And having those things decided ahead of time, what happens when we disagree? Because you are going to disagree. It's a real good idea, a good thing to build into your model, you know, and this is for everybody.
Yeah, right. So we have been talking about that actually, which leads me to a discussion that we had earlier today. You know, we were going over kind of ethical guidelines, you know, for facilitators, and I wondered if you guys have ethical guidelines specifically for APG facilitators, for group leaders.
Actually, we just follow whatever the certifications are and ethical guidelines of the state for the different levels. That's typically what we have done. We haven't separated anything out separately.
Okay.
we haven't ever seen really a need to. You know, they usually cover things pretty solidly, the state guidelines. What are who is certifying peer recovery people in New Hampshire right now?
So we actually just had a decision a few weeks ago that that our organization is. So the University of New Hampshire Institute on Disability is going to be doing that. So right now we certified wraparound coordinators and felt like it was a fairly similar process.
Yeah. The National Association of Alcoholism and Drug Abuse Counselors has some certification processes, and I believe they also have some ethical guidelines that they've done around peers. I don't know if the ICRC has or not, but I imagine they have also. So you might want to take a glance at those if they.
Yeah, we did look at a you know, there was like a recovery coach ethical guidelines, and then we also looked at the national standards for peer supporters. Yeah, I just wasn't sure if there was something specific for that you guys followed for APGs.
You know, talking about the medication, MAT, that's a perfect example of a point of disagreement that could arise, and how is this going to be dealt with, because it throws families into a real problem and the users into a real problem. I mean, the people who are treating into a real problem. That's a good example that can happen real fast. So y'all's time that you're spending on talking about this is time well spent. And you guys who haven't been talking about it, I strongly suggest you start thinking and looking at this, because it's coming. It not only is coming, it's here. It is here, and it needs to be addressed, and addressed properly and effectively.
John, can I ask, how have you seen it addressed successfully when there is that conflict?
The best situation is where you have, like I said, there's either a prearranged decision tree on how the decision is going to be made, you know, prior to the disagreement, or the way that the program is built decides it ahead of time. And what I mean by that, let's say you're having to partner. Let's say your alternative peer group program is only meetings and social functions and family meetings, okay? And for IOP, you have some partnering group, one person or group of people, you know, that are out there doing that. If you can ahead of time, let's say you have an IOP group that you use most of the time because they best understand what's happening in the APG world. If ahead of time you can talk with the powers that be, say, look, there's going to be disagreements, you know, and we need to kind of really decide on some paths to solve those disagreements. You know, if it's about medication, well, you should decide it. But if I am sitting over here and watching and hearing that the medication is being abused or being added to, and we need to confront or, you know, intervene on that process and work with the family, how are we going to decide that? All right. That's the hardest one. That's the toughest one, when you're having to prearrange these agreement processes with the clinical elements out there. Easier, much easier, is when the same organization owns them both, and they decide, they have somebody that sits over both of them that decides when there's a disagreement that's going on. Just like any time, this is not unusual. If you go to a hospital and you have a case of liver transplant, liver cancer or something, they'll take all the stuff into a room with a bunch of docs, and they'll all sit there and disagree with each other, but there's always one that gets to make the decision. So if you can set that up ahead of time, that's the best, but sometimes you can't, you know, especially in the growth periods. But be aware of it and be ready for it, because it's coming. Disagreements are going to come. Disagreements will come within the facility, within the APG itself, you know. The family coordinator will have an opinion of what needs to happen. The person working with the 13-year-old has a different opinion of what needs to happen. You know, who's going to decide that? And it's a good idea to set up those decision paths ahead of time. Robin, you've seen a lot of stuff. You got any comment?
Yeah, you're 100% right on. And this really ties into the MAT, the questions that I had, you know, because I see the benefit of partnering up with lots of different, like in this area, there aren't a whole lot of treatment centers. But forming those relationships with them so they trust what we're doing and that we're going to continue that care for their client and then work with them when they have to be referred back or whatnot. But with MAT, that's a continued relationship you have with whoever's providing that. And if we're not providing that ourselves, we have to be trusted that we're seeing on our end something they may not be seeing, because I've seen it with my client, the potential abuse of the medication, not following through with the goals in mind as a recovery coach. So anyway, you cleared it up for me, John. Like, if we're going to at all work with people that are on MAT, that needs to be clearly defined. Like, what's our role? The families have to buy into us being able to talk to the treatment provider. That's important. We have to be in the loop. That's the whole point of the APG.
Right. The APG is about continuity of care.
Right.
That is the whole thrust of it.
Mhm.
Any other thoughts or anything before we talk about a couple others? All right. Like I said, I would love any comments and real life situations that are going on or that you're going through. On the MAT side, I can tell you I have an adult client who is on MAT, like I said a second ago, and he's been on MAT for a while. And there really was not, it's all started while he was in prison. There's not a lot of rationale behind why. It very possibly he was put on MAT to make him easier to manage in the joint, just being blunt. And now he's having to confront that and come to decisions on where to go with it. He has to find somebody that'll really work with him seriously on this. We're very lucky that he is not, he hasn't been, what's the word I'm looking for? That neurologically and psychologically, he is still competent in being able to make a decision and desire to find out who he would be should he does. One, did he really need it? Two, if he did, then what's the goal and how do we approach it? And three, trying to get there, because there's a certain level of dysfunction that doesn't exist, the ability to consider those things. I'm just looking at a text from Heidi there. That's awesome. Heidi, I'm so glad you guys are here. Y'all are bringing an element that we, those of us in the field, weren't able to. Frankly, it's a matter of time and money.
Yeah, right. Seriously, I've been spending so much time and resources and thinking, my God, how can anyone, trying to actually implement an APG do all this work, while also opening an APG. So
you can. This is so great.
But it's been really, really wonderful for us to, learn from all of your expertise. So, we really appreciate being at the table and just how great everyone's been.
Well, the motto for us in this process and in this room and in these videos centers for me around, if this is a disease, we want 10 out of 10 to get well. That's what you do with the disease. Until 10 out of 10 get well, there's some things we're not doing that we should, and there's some things we're doing that we shouldn't. And we need to keep looking and keep talking and remember that. There's a lot to learn and a big reason to learn it.
So John, that brings me to another ask. I'm sorry. I know I have a lot of asks in this group. Another area that we recognize as being so critical to the success of the APGs is family engagement and involvement. And so if any of you have any thoughts or resources around that, again.
Next week we're going to do family.
Oh, great.
I tell you, and here's where we're going to start, everybody. I was looking through your stuff, and I noticed that it said everybody who attends will be voluntary, not coerced or ordered. Or something
Right,
like
right.
That. You remember
That's
that?
yeah, yes. We've had lots of debates about that one too.
I bet. I bet. And especially if you're going to have a family group, like, well, what are they there
Right.
for? What do you do with them? How do you do all of those kind of things?
Right.
So it'll be great for next week. We will hop into that if that's okay. Is that good?
Okay. Yeah, that's great. I'm not sure if I'm able to attend next week, but I will certainly watch the recording.
There you go. There you go. I'm looking forward to it. Anybody got any last minute things for today? Was everybody able to see the resources that Heidi was ever able to post on the chat? Okay. Let's see. What do I do? File. What do I want to do with that? Save chat.
Oh, I did want to say that, Kaylin, do you also supermodel in your spare time? Because your like photo looks like you just stepped off a runway.
I'm like blushing. I don't know what to say. Thank you.
Oh.
Thank you for the compliment. Thank you.
Wait a
Look
minute.
at that.
Wait a minute. What about me?
Sorry, John, your headshot looks great.
All right, fine. Mike actually is a supermodel. He really is. I just let you know. And James, well, he does nudes. I'm back to nephew today for some reason. I don't know what my deal is. I'm so sorry. I'll talk to you guys later.
Oh man, John.
Thanks,
Love you, bye.
everybody.
Did we actually record
That's
that?
a great
Somebody
joke.
else-
did.
You know what? You should start off one of your sessions with that joke.
Which one? I have
That's a great
so
joke, John.
many jokes.
No.
All
doesn't
right,
need-
jokes. Next time I'm writing it down. Jokes.
Oh my God, no, he doesn't need more material. You need an editing class to take that out, this last couple minutes.
I know. In fact, at 2:00, I have a masculine, what is it? Toxic masculinity workshop I got to go to. So I'm going to have to cop to stuff when I get there. Talk to you guys later.
Thanks,
See
everybody.
you
Thanks,
next
John.
week.
Bye-bye.
Love you. Bye.
Bye.
Mike, be picking your day.